Hi everybody, my name is Cash Bunny and I am a video director and visual effects artist currently living in Los Angeles, California. I've been freelancing for the last 5 years, specializing in short form content for Instagram, and I've worked with brands such as Porsche, Microsoft, the Olympics, and many more. Now technically, I'm not qualified for most of the work that I do, but there are 3 very important things that have allowed my career to grow in the way that it has, and those are curiosity, community, and self-awareness. These are things that I don't think get enough credit in general, but my story in particular really shows how powerful they can be. So let's start with curiosity. If you ask a creative professional what's the most important aspect to having a successful career, more often than not, they'll mention skill. And skill is important, of course, but as creatives, it's not always what sets us apart. Skill comes from practicing one particular thing over and over. But curiosity is what helps us find that one particular thing that we want to be skilled at, and then to push the boundaries of what's possible with it. So if you want to get into filmmaking, for example, there's a lot of options, so it could be hard to know where to start. Most people don't enter into the video industry knowing that they want to be a sound mixer or a texture artist. They start with a general idea of what they want to do, and then they find their niche through years of trying different things. So I'm only a video director because I tried a bunch of stuff out, and this is kind of where I fit. But my very first experience with filmmaking was actually as a child actor. When I was around 6 years old, I did some extra work, got an agent, did some work here and there, and I really liked being on set, but I hated auditioning, and that is 99% of acting. So I quit, and I tried to be behind the camera instead. So this was the first ever video that I shot. It was my little cousin, and I made it while we were visiting family. Shot a few clips in the backyard, and then cut it together with editing software that came with the camera. This was like a million years ago, so it was very not great. And made a little edit, and at the end of the day I showed my mom, and she was super impressed by how not that bad this edit was. So she saw some potential, and she decided to get me a camera and Final Cut Express and help me kind of pursue it. So in high school, I shot a bit of stuff with friends, but mostly just when I had to for like school projects and stuff, because shooting was like, it felt almost like homework. It felt like something I had to do if I wanted to edit. But the editing was really what I was excited about. So I decided to pursue editing more directly. So I went to the School of Visual Arts right here in New York because it was actually one of the few colleges that offered editing as a major. And the first year's classes were pretty heavily focused on production, specifically short narrative content, which is not what I was interested in. So I felt a little bit like an outsider, and especially because everybody else in the class knew how to use all the equipment. So for me, it was a little bit intimidating. Luckily, one of my professors said that the editing students didn't have to produce our own content. We could just edit other people's projects for them. So that was a huge relief for me, and that made me feel like I was actually bringing something to the table. And there were a few students in my class that were producing stuff at a way higher level than everybody else. So I knew like these were the guys I had to work with. And this is a few of them. We worked on a few projects together, all of which presented a unique set of challenges for me to figure out. And whether it was learning a new tool or a new technique or just a new way to manage files, I always walked away from every project a little bit better. I was having so much fun and I wanted to edit as much as possible, but they just weren't giving me enough footage to try all the things I wanted. And then it kind of dawned on me, I didn't need to wait for them to give me footage or for anybody to give me footage because I had the internet and I could just download anything I wanted. So now I could find literally anything. And that opened some very important doors for me creatively. Now during this time, I was also getting really into electronic music, and I found one song in particular that had so many intricate sounds and such like an intense energy that it was just begging to be visualized somehow. And that song was called Scada by Skrillex. I was so excited to make a video to this song, but I didn't know where to start because the internet is a very big place and it was just overwhelming. So a while before this, my mom mentioned that Dumbo had some like crazy trippy scenes in it and it'd be cool to make a video, so I started there. So I made a full edit to this Skrillex song and visuals from Dumbo. This was my thing, right? And it was a few good moments, but it wasn't like as epic as I wanted. So I thought, all right, maybe I'll add another movie in there. Maybe I'll make it like a compilation, right? But then 2 movies was super weird because that's just 2 random movies put together. That made no sense. So I was like, all right, maybe 3 Disney movies? Like, is that cohesive yet? So I added Snow White and Mary Poppins. But then Mary Poppins stuck out because it had like live action characters and that made no sense. So I needed more of that. So I added Willy Wonka and then Wizard of Oz and then Twister and then 22 more until I had 28 movies in this video. And that's 52 hours of footage. And to give you like perspective on how much footage that is, a Premiere timeline can only hold 24 hours of footage. This was 2 full Premiere timelines and then 4 hours extra. So ridiculous, right? And it may seem like overkill, but the more variety I added, the more the variety kind of made sense together. So when I had 3 videos that were sort of similar, didn't make any sense. But when I had 28 videos that were not similar at all, the randomness kind of brought them together. That was what they had in common. So this is every cut from the video. And you can tell there's like cartoons mixed throughout, there's black and white stuff, there's scary, there's like a little bit of everything, and it kind of makes a whole collage when you mix it all evenly. This one edit really changed my life in a lot of ways. It gave me the time and the freedom to find my style. It made me really understand the little intricacies of visualizing music. And Skrillex himself posted this video, which made it blow up and added a lot of legitimacy to this chaotic style that I was like, is this like ridiculous that I'm doing this? So I felt like it was worth pursuing at that point. It inspired me so much that I didn't want to spend my time on anything else, and I would just edit through meals and through classes and through work because I just couldn't break away from this edit. Okay, so remember when my professor said that the editing students didn't have to shoot their own content? So since I put my heart and soul into this Skrillex edit, I decided to make this my final project for school. So on our last day of school, everyone was taking turns showing their projects, and when I volunteered to show mine, my professor said, well, why don't we let somebody go who actually did their project? Implying that mine wasn't as legit because I didn't shoot it, right? So that was a pretty big slap in the face, and I decided this school is not for me. So I dropped out. So fast forward just a couple years, and I'm a full-time video editor at MTV. My time there was amazing, and most of the projects I worked on were beautifully shot and interesting and fun to edit. But there was one project that was not so much. And without getting too into detail, just to give you perspective, this was a scripted piece, full crew, proper budget. So my job as an editor should have been relatively straightforward, just basically following the script. But the footage was kind of a catastrophe. So I was used to fixing lots of problems in post, as all editors are, but this was kind of a different level. This was like light stands in the middle of shots and people yelling over each other. So like some of the footage was just purely unusable. And there were big gaps in the plot that we had to somehow fix without reshooting. So my boss, Andy, and I stayed up all night writing every single line down on a separate note card and laying them out in different orders until we could create a new storyline. And this for me was actually really inspiring. It made me think about editing less as knowing the shortcuts or making good transitions or preserving continuity. And I started thinking of it more as I have a special skill of visualizing what can and can't be done with this footage. And so it's my job as the editor to analyze all those possibilities, make the choice that I think is best, and then communicate to the team why that's the best choice. So it was more of, a storytelling and almost, at that point, almost like a writing direction. So that was just, for me, like a new angle of editing. So we found a way to make this work, but all this time and money and effort could have been saved by just shooting correctly in the first place. That made me realize that shooting wasn't something I had to master. It wasn't something that I needed to be the best at. It would just help me ensure that I got the footage I needed. So I asked my friend Seth if I could borrow his DSLR to practice with. He said yes, and he and Andy both graciously offered to help me learn. So once I understood the basics, the intimidation factor was gone, and I finally felt like I could maybe be capable of shooting. So fast forward another year. I'm now living in Los Angeles, California. Oh, this font is wrong, so just, excuse me. And I'm working as a full-time video editor at Insomniac Events. See, I wasn't supposed to cover it. It was supposed to be up top. Okay. And at this time, I also bought my first professional camera, which was a Sony a7S II. And to get comfortable shooting with it, I shot with friends for free as practice, and that was a great way to learn without the expectations of like a paid gig. And so I got better, and eventually I started taking on paid gigs and working pretty consistently. But then this friend of mine threw a wrench in the whole plan and showed me this video that was unlike anything I had ever seen before. This was the after movie of a festival called Lightning in a Bottle. It was so simple and so brilliant. And to me, it was obvious that whoever made this video had such a clear vision and such an immaculate way of achieving it. And by the way, I was working at Insomniac Events, so I was making festival recaps every day for an entire year. And this really stuck out that much that I was like, all right, who did this? So I found out it was directed by a guy named Ari Faroy. I looked at the rest of his work and was entranced by his entire catalog. So as you can probably tell, I'm a maximalist by nature, so I always came from a how much can I add to one single video mentality. But Ari was the complete opposite. Most of his videos used one clip, just a few seconds long, and then added like a clever, simple effect to make it hypnotic. So this format of short, single subject videos allowed Ari to be way more prolific than I was, and I wanted to get into that sort of headspace so I could create more. So it turns out Ari was local, and I messaged him, said I was a huge fan, would love to work with him. And a few months later, he brought me onto a project for Steve Aoki and Hakkasan. And at that time, I did not know the first thing about After Effects. Great in Premiere, but could not get my way around After Effects to save my life. So I was doing all of my effects in Premiere. And Ari was just appalled to hear this. So he kindly offered to teach me After Effects. After years of trying to use After Effects and just failing, I would just open the program and just get really frustrated and just close it and do whatever I could in Premiere. So after years of that back and forth, all it took was 1 or 2 lessons with Ari to actually ask the questions that I needed to ask, and that allowed me to understand the basics well enough to find my way around the program. And I caught on pretty quickly, and I made my first successful After Effects edit later that week. So this is when curiosity really became like the center of my career, because it was no longer about what clips I could find. It was about what I could do with the clips I already had. So for that reason, I never really tried to master any specific technique, because once I used an effect in a video, it would kind of get boring and I would move on to the next thing. So I wouldn't even reuse effects unless there was a way to reinvent it and somehow make it feel new. So here's an example of how I could sort of reinvent an old effect. So this was a video I did for Nike in 2019, and the basic idea was that the background was shot on 360 and it was a digital movement, and the shoes were shot practically and they were doing an actual movement. And so I put them together so that it looked like the camera was spinning, right? So here's how we shot the shoes. This was a huge budget, really big budget. And I told you it was a big budget, right? Yeah, so this was how we shot the background. It was a piece of fabric and a hula hoop and a tape tripod. Yeah, it was good. And then in After Effects, I put the shoe cutout on top of the 360 background and rotated it so that the shoes were always pointing in the same spot. And that created the illusion that the camera was spinning around these floating shoes. So I really liked this specific version of it, but I felt like there was more to explore there. So later, I reused this same concept, but kind of reinvented it by making it a transition between 2 scenes. So this is the same kind of theory where the background is 360, but instead of a practical rotation in the middle, it's like a 2D card that's spun with like a 3D effect, and it's just like manually matched to the background rotation, and now it adds this nice little transition. So this one happened to work out well, how I envisioned it, but a lot of times that doesn't happen at all. So I do as many test shoots as I can. So this is, if you look at there's 2 rows here, it's a little bit hard to see, but the left here is or the left of each column, I guess, is the test, and then the final is next to it. So I was experimenting and testing ideas constantly, and I got pretty proficient in After Effects, but I would always eventually hit a roadblock where I couldn't figure something out. And this is an advantage of knowing your creative community. So before I got into the world of video, I kind of assumed that it would be competitive and cutthroat, and people would sort of gatekeep their skills to stay ahead. And luckily, I was very mistaken. Almost all the creators I've met have been really happy to support their fellow artists by sharing their work and giving professional advice and even introducing them to their own clients. I never expected that. Nearly all the skills I'm hired for today were taught to me by friends. Okay, so earlier I told you that I dropped out of college and then got hired at MTV. Obviously, there was a little something missing there, so let me rewind for a second and tell you how that actually happened. So after I left school, my friend Seth, the same guy who let me borrow his camera, hired me for some of my very first freelance editing gigs. And at the time, he was an established director with big name clients, and although I hadn't done anything on that level yet, he gave me a shot. And one of those projects he brought me on for was with MTV. That project went really well and led to several more, and I became friends with some of the people at the office. So a few months later, freelance work was kind of slow and I needed a job real bad. So I managed to, I was basically looking for anything I could find. I scoured Craigslist and was applying for surveys and bartending jobs and wedding videos, literally anything I could possibly find. And I managed to get one interview for a bar job right next to the MTV offices and had a bit of time to kill. So I hit up the producer I worked with on those freelance jobs and I was like, hey, you wanna come outside, meet for a second, say hi. So we caught up for a bit and he asked why I was in town and I mentioned that I had a bartending interview. And he looked shocked and said, one of my editors just quit. You don't want the job, do you? And this was my face. I'm still shocked at how just serendipitous this moment was. And it's a perfect example of how making friendships with people in your field is just a win for everyone. Andy found his editor, and I found my job. So it might sound like a very obvious piece of advice, but just tell people what you want. Another great example of this was in 2019 when I did a job for Disney. It was my second time working with this team in Orlando, and when I came back to the offices a year later, one of the guys was like, oh my God, I can't believe you came back. Like, I thought you were too big for us now that you've worked with Will Smith. And I was like, you're Disney. Like, huh? I was so confused by that. And I guess like people just lose sight of what they have and how cool certain opportunities are. So this interaction made me realize that other potential clients might be assuming that I didn't want work. It might be assuming I was already booked or whatever. So I reached out to a previous client that I really loved working with but hadn't heard from in a while, called Virgin Voyages. It was a cruise company. And I basically said, hey, I loved working together and I love your brand as a whole, so I'm just throwing it out there. If there's any content you need coming up, just let me know, I'm down for it. And they responded with a list of cities in Europe and told me to pick my top 5. And a month later, I was on a paid vacation in Europe. So I'm fully aware of how lucky I am to have had that opportunity, and I have the creative community to thank for it. I was recommended to that client by a fellow creator I met on Instagram. So it's all about who you know. And I think in general that phrase is kind of used in a bad way because it's like favoritism or nepotism, but the internet and specifically social media has really leveled the playing field, so all the right people and all the people who are hiring for amazing jobs are more accessible than ever, and they're looking at people's work, they're looking for people's work. So, making connections is easier than ever, really. And although I've met some amazing people at school and at previous jobs, the vast majority of my creative network today is just through Instagram DMs. And I'm always on the hunt for new accounts to follow, and specifically I get excited when it's like a small account that has barely any followers and is like really new to the game, because it feels like I'm finding like a rare Pokemon. So I'll usually send a DM and introduce myself, just tell them I admire their work, and from there, once that initial connection is made, it's really easy to just stay in touch. So the friendship can kind of start naturally. I've seen so many of my favorite creators go from shooting experimental videos with friends to directing some of the biggest brands and celebrities in the world. And I really do mean, I'm not saying that for one or two people. I really have seen a lot of people on that same trajectory thanks to social media. So it's really amazing to watch people's careers unfold in real time and get to celebrate their milestones with them, knowing how hard they work to get there. So I know this sounds cliche, but everyone has to start somewhere. And if your skills aren't up to your standards yet, who cares? Just share your work anyway. Let the people who support you watch you grow. Like, I feel so much more connected to artists that I can see where they start and see their trajectory than I do if I find a page and all their videos are perfect and polished, and like, I just have no connection to that. And I think, the same can be said for music artists or directors, anything like that. Like, when you see their work, before they got really good, that really helps you relate to them. So apply that to yourself, and if you feel like your skills aren't there yet, that's okay. Share your work and show people where you're at now, because then they'll see where you go later. Another great way to make real connections with fellow artists is by co-working. So I've always loved the energy of just being around other creators in school and at work, and when I became a full-time freelancer, that was kind of missing. So I started reaching out to local artists and inviting them to co-work. And I met a lot of creators this way, and a lot of them we started co-working regularly, had a little friend circle, and we were starting a nice network. And then COVID hit, and that was all gone. Working in isolation was definitely challenging for me. I always felt a lot more motivated when there were other creators around and I could kind of feed off that energy. So it was a difficult transition, and a few weeks into lockdown, I really started to feel the sense of community missing. So I posted an Instagram story asking if anyone was interested in a virtual coffee shop on Zoom where we work together but keep our microphones muted. So like, hey, I want to hang out with you, but I do not want to talk to you. I wasn't sure if this was a really weird idea, but I threw it out there anyway, and surprisingly, a lot of people were on board. So I posted the link on my story, and people started joining immediately from all around the world. And this was the first time since the pandemic that you could like mingle, so to say, and you could go somewhere and just run into people that you didn't know. It wasn't like you had to like DM somebody and type in who you're talking to. It was like you could just kind of show up and meet people organically. So it really felt like we were in the same room together. I really enjoyed it. Everyone else seemed to enjoy it. So I started up again the next day, and I called it Edit Party, and it's been going ever since. So this is our current total based on right now. I tried to estimate when I would say this part of the speech. So, and actually right here they are. So they're actually on right now. So we have been 24/7 for over 3 years and counting, and you can go on literally any time of day, and there will always be someone there. Now this was a collaboration I did with about 80 different Edit Party friends from around the world. And there's a pun here. I don't know if you guys get it. It's an endless Zoom of an endless Zoom. Right? So Edit Party has grown into a real-life community of creator friends around the world who teach each other, plan meetups, collaborate, and even show up to support you when someone does their first speech at a B&H convention. My roommates, my manager, and half the people I work with are all people I met on Edit Party. And I think what sets this community apart from other filmmaking communities is that we have a friends first mentality. There's no schedule, no one pays or gets paid, and everybody is welcome to join regardless of your credentials. So there are day one beginners working alongside award-winning professionals, and you would never know which is which. Unlike other platforms, Edit Party is not a highlight reel. It's just everyday life. People coexist during boring, unedited moments that sparks really genuine connections that extend past the screen. And I think that once you have a connected community, the benefits of a more structured community will naturally follow. So our members regularly share skills and give feedback and help each other find jobs, but we do so in a reciprocal way where nobody's the teacher, nobody's the student. Everyone kind of takes turns being both. Communities like Edit Party can keep you humble and motivated and can give you the kind of help that school can't. So as everybody knows, we're in an AI boom right now with incredible new tools coming out every single day. So it's extremely hard for anyone to keep up, but it's impossible for schools to keep up because they can't update their curriculum fast enough. So your creative friends and your creative community is what's going to help you stay informed through all that and try out these new tools and get feedback so you don't have to do it all yourself. I don't know where I'd be today without having such a great crew of like-minded friends by my side. But I do know what it looks like when I'm left to my own devices, and it's not great. Having an accurate view of your abilities, skills, and achievements without inflating or diminishing them will fast track you to where you want to be. No matter what your weaknesses are, just being aware of them can prevent them from holding you back. So my biggest weakness is disorganization. I'm always misplacing things and forgetting passwords and struggling to keep up with my inbox, and that adds stress to my life every single day. So I've tried for years to improve it, but this is just who I am. We're moving on. Instead of being in denial, I just accepted it and looked for solutions. And what worked for me was hiring someone extremely organized to manage my business. So this was a perfect marriage of skills because I could focus on what I was good at, which was the creative, and she could focus on the business, and that was what she was good at. So now instead of focusing on creative and letting the rest of my business not do so good, now both parts are improving at the same time. So being aware of my weakness actually made the whole thing stronger. A healthy level of self-awareness will not only help you with your weaknesses though, it'll also help you empower your strengths. So over the years, I've had some jobs that were great on paper, but just didn't feel right for me long term. And I learned that there is a big difference between a good opportunity and a good fit. Just because a good opportunity comes your way does not mean you should take it. And as a freelancer, I think it can be really difficult to say no to a job, especially because we all know what it's like to not have jobs coming in and to really have to say yes to every job. So it's sometimes hard to say no. But once you're getting consistent work, you have to adjust. Saying yes to everything got me burnt out and stressed and tired, and I had to change my mentality from what opportunities can I get to what opportunities do I even want. So for example, I used to love going to music festivals, and whenever a music festival would hit me up to work there, I'd be so excited because it was like, oh my gosh, I get to go to this amazing place. It's a dream job. But then when I was there, I'd feel stressed and like down on myself and like I wasn't delivering on the level that I should have been delivering. So it always I would walk away from the job feeling like, man, like why didn't I do my best? And so I had to learn to separate the job from the work. Yes, I liked the job. I liked the idea of the job and what it, seemed like, but the work itself didn't really suit me. So saying no to work that doesn't suit you can prevent a lot of issues down the line for both you and the client. For me, I knew I was not a strong shooter, so for a long time I only shot tripod shots, and I did not know how to use a gimbal, and I realized I didn't want to know how to use a gimbal either, because I just did not want to do that. So instead of trying to learn everything myself, I decided to start hiring DPs who were great at that, and then I was able to actually increase the level of all of my productions. So now I could concept much more ambitiously because I knew I had people who could actually get these things done rather than trying to, figure it out myself. So without having to operate the camera, I was able to focus on directing and achieving new levels of effects. And as I got more and more complex with effects, my computer got less and less cooperative, unfortunately. It got to the point where half my time at the computer was spent literally just trying to make it work. So huge waste of time. Okay, I do not have any visuals for the next little bit, so I'm just gonna put a picture up. Okay, so my computer sucked. Okay, so a friend of mine suggested outsourcing some of the non-creative parts of editing so that I could save the headache and just focus on the creative. And I never thought of doing this before because in my head, a lot of my value as an editor was because of my willingness to do the tedious stuff in the long hours that other people might not be willing to do. So I was really conflicted, like was hiring editing help cheating? And when I took a step back, I realized that putting in long hours to do things like masking and tracking and dealing with computer issues made me feel like I was really deep in an edit. It made me feel like I was already, by the time I was done with that, I felt like I was halfway done with an edit. But really all I had was the exact same video I started with, just separated into layers. I hadn't actually done anything creative yet. So I realized, well, that kind of stuff, any editor can do that kind of stuff. If I want to focus on creative treatments, then if I delegate that, then I'm able to sit at the computer for the very first time working on this project with everything done. And my first thing that I have to think about is how can I be creative with this footage? So that was gonna change my mindset completely. And so I just had to ask myself through that whole process, like, what is the root quality that sets me apart from others? Is it how many hours I'm willing to put in? Like what is it that makes me a worthy editor? And I decided that that was my ability to A, find unique editing opportunities based on specific footage, and B, imagine new ways to use or combine techniques. So with that in mind, delegating simple tasks was not only acceptable, but necessary. In realizing those core strengths that I wanted to focus on, I also realized that I was not that great of a visual effects editor at all. I know After Effects well, and I can do whatever I need, but I certainly could never be hired as like an effects artist on a Marvel movie, right? Like I was limited in my knowledge and never formally trained. So I came up with a new workflow, and this is what I'm still using today. Basically, I'll make a rough cut to get the timing right, get the shots right, get the look of the effects right, and find effects in like little areas that maybe other people wouldn't see them. And I make a really rough version of that, and then I send that off to a proper visual effects editor who can build it and make it really clean from the ground up. I think a lot of creatives want to do everything themselves because you want to take full ownership over your work, and I definitely feel that as well. So it was a hard transition going from I did that to we did that. But this reminds me of something called the ship of Theseus paradox. So if you aren't familiar, it's pretty interesting. Imagine you have a ship called the ship of Theseus. And over time, parts start to wear out, so you start replacing them with new ones. First you replace a plank of wood, and then a sail, and then a mast, and so on until eventually every single part of the ship has been replaced. Now the question is the ship you have at the end the same ship of Theseus that you started with? Some people say yes, because it still looks and functions the same, but others might argue that if every single part has been replaced, it's not really the same ship anymore. So growing my production scope felt kind of similar to that paradox. Like if I'm not finding locations or holding the camera or tracking the footage myself, is it still my work? Is it still the same ship? And after thinking about it, in my eyes, it kind of doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is that the ship is moving in the same direction, and I'm still the captain. I'm still making sure that we're going to the right place. So what really matters is that the ship is stronger than ever before. So as long as I continually ask myself these 3 questions, I know that I will keep moving in the right direction. 1, am I enjoying what I'm doing? 2, is it utilizing my best qualities? And 3, if not, what needs to change? So I evaluate what I'm doing through this lens regularly, and I'm always ready to change paths when things stop feeling right. That's why I never set specific career goals for myself, because I just don't know what I'm gonna want later. Like I've changed trajectories a lot already. I used to think I wanted to be a music video editor, and then a trailer editor, and then a shooter and a visual effects artist, and now I want to be a director. But right now I'm a speaker at a convention for the first time, so maybe after this I'll want to do this. I don't know. I don't think so, but no, it's going great, but I think I'll still do video. But anyway, the point is that I'm gonna let my career go in whatever direction feels right for who I am at that time. So, thank you so much to B&H for letting me be here today, and thank you all for listening. And thank you. And thank you to everyone who supported me in my journey. And so many of them are here today. Andy's here, Seth is here, Ari's here, Edit Party's here. Like, it's just such a crazy combination of things that are all coming together for this moment. So thank you, B&H, for giving me the chance to do this. And I think now we're going to do a Q&A for a little bit.
Hi, I'm Victor. Congratulations on your journey.
Thank you.
I'm curious, how has been your directing, your progress in your career, and how have you gone about your director's treatment for projects?
Well, yeah, when I first started doing like the visual effects style that I'm doing now, I was just very much an independent creator. So I would work with, me and Ari worked together a lot, or I would work independently on projects, and it was very much just like a camera, a tripod, and then maybe a person who'd meet you for 20 minutes, at the beach, and you'd shoot something cool or whatever. So that was very much like run and gun style, no permits or anything like that. And now as I'm moving into like larger and larger productions, so like I said, I started with DPs, and then I'd have like a small crew, and now it's getting bigger and bigger. So as I get into bigger productions, I've actually found that the older way of doing things, I think, is phasing out in my experience, and a lot of the companies and brands that reach out to me know that I'm a social first creator. They know that I don't come from a Hollywood background. So a lot of them are like, okay, hey, we'll handle the production, we'll handle making all that stuff happen, and we just want to support you and your vision. So I'm able to make, a kind of rough treatment, and they're able to help me flesh that out and help me find a storyboard artist who can, make that come to life and things like that. So I find that a lot of the people that I've been working with have been really supportive and understanding. And the first project that I did that was like on that big level was with Microsoft. And I was kind of not accepting projects on that scale for a long time because I was a little bit nervous. And I did it with Microsoft only because I was in the video. Like I was kind of as an influencer, if you want to say, in the video, like a feature. And so I thought, okay, that's a little bit less pressure on me. They're not hiring me for this big ad and this big campaign. I'm kind of like in it. They know I'm social first. And so that was a good first go at it. And I realized from there that I can do it. I can handle a big set, and it's totally fine as long as you have a supportive team. So now I'm growing into bigger productions, but I don't want to only be bigger, like I still like having smaller productions. So I think I'll in the future be a little bit of both, but yeah, I think growing into it has been like a relatively easy process.
Hi, thanks for sharing your journey. I was wondering if we zoom further back, what was your first step? Like, did you know how to edit when you went to SVA? Did you have some kind of software? What was your very first baby step?
Yeah, so I had a camera and I made an edit. Actually, my first edit I ever made was in ULED Video Studio. I don't know if anybody knows that. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is worth. So yeah, it came with a little handy cam that I was using for this first video that I made. And I made a little edit in it. I am honestly not even sure how I figured it out. I guess it was pretty simple. And then from there, I went to Final Cut Express. My mom just bought me a copy of it, so I was able to play around with it. And then grew into Final Cut 7, and then eventually Premiere, and just kind of went from there. So mostly self-taught, I would say. For actual editing, mostly self-taught. And then for visual effects, a lot of that was taught by like friends.
Hi, I guess this could potentially be a bit of a personal question. Clearly dropping out of school is not an easy thing to do, especially hearing that about your final project that you were really passionate about. Were there any really difficult things like relationships with family that became strained? If so, how did you overcome all of that?
You know, my parents have always been really supportive. I'm really, really lucky in that sense. So when I told them I wanted to drop out, this was actually my second time dropping out of school, now that I'm thinking about it. So I went to a school called Rowan in New Jersey. I'm from Jersey. And I went to a school called Rowan. It was like a state school because everyone was encouraging me, listen, you change your mind a lot. You're probably not going to always want to do video. Go to a school where you can change majors. And so I went to a school where they kind of had a video program, but it was like a communications thing. It wasn't like video editing. It was communications because I thought I should have the flexibility of changing my mind. So I was like, this school is definitely not right for me. I need to be in an editing school. So that was taken well. And then when I went to SVA and decided to drop out, I think they were maybe a little bit unsure, but I just kept telling them like, listen, like I've always trusted my gut and like I know this is right. It's just like not the right school for me. And also it was really a very, very expensive school. So it was the right move, and luckily it worked out.
Incredibly impressed with your edit party, especially as I'm a community manager who runs events for Squarespace.
Oh, wow.
And specialize in online events. I'm curious, what do you think is the key to the longevity and the success of this very niche community?
Being muted, it sounds like a small detail, but that was one of the most crucial things for the longevity of this community because it had a few benefits. First of all, it's a passive experience. Things like Clubhouse, which had a huge boom, everybody was on Clubhouse for like a month or so, that died out pretty quick because you can't be on the phone with somebody all the time. You want to listen to music, you want to, edit to, if you're editing, you want to be able to listen to your audio, like you can't be on all the time. But with Edit Party, you can be on all the time and it can be passive. So like when we chat in the chat of Zoom, but we don't talk with our voices. So you're able to kind of like go in the chat and say, hey, I'm gonna be focusing for the next little bit. And then nobody, like you're not being rude. You can just do your own thing and people are like, yeah, look how focused she is. So that allows the experience like to be, you can stay on for hours at a time. And also it has a benefit that I never even would have been able to plan for, but people who do not speak English as their first language can easily translate, and that was huge for us too because we're so international. We're from I think like 75 countries, so that was huge as well.
One celebrity in your career that stood out to you working with, and also if you had one dream celebrity to work with that you would just melt in your shoes and just bow down to.
Okay, I've got answers to both. Celebrity who's just amazing to work with, it's cliche, but Will Smith was truly a legend for a reason. Nicest person, absolute pro. We gave him like a whole script for one of our videos and he had like about 2 minutes to learn it and do it multiple times. Easily did it. And we needed him to do it a little bit faster. So like the second he was just like 25% faster, like yeah, nailed it. Like he's a pro for a reason. And somebody I would die to work with, the one and only, Danny DeVito. It's my boy. Hi.
I'm Cam. So I have a bit of a dilemma, and I kind of want your feedback on it. So I shoot more like corporate stuff, like businesses, brands, like entrepreneurs, things like that. But I've always had, like, whenever I listen to a song, I'm like, I like see the song, you know, if it makes sense. And I've always wanted to try to create stuff like that. But I remember one time I did an After Effects project, and it took me like 12 hours to do a 30-second clip.
Yep.
And that just like broke me. So now I'm like, I don't want to do After Effects anymore. So like, what advice would you have for somebody that like I want to make those more like creative edits, but it's just like it's probably me just being afraid of After Effects. But like, what like advice would you have for something like that?
Well, one thing I definitely want to say is that 12 hours for a 30-second edit is faster than I've ever done a video in my entire life. That's record speed. You should be proud of yourself. That is record speed. So, I mean, I think you got to have a certain kind of personality to want to do those kinds of hours at a computer. But like, there's a lot of people that I know that might be more shooting oriented. Like a friend of mine, Old TJP, he's like a really, really creative shooter that makes crazy rigs and like motion control with like multiple points of orbit and all this crazy stuff. So like, that's another way that he can make a really creative video, but without having to put in those long hours editing. So definitely I would explore like some shooting styles that might be fun. But you know, my experience, what was best for me was just like trying out different things. So just downloading a bunch of clips and then chopping them all together, for me that was like a blast. But again, that took like months. So I think there's definitely ways to do it, and especially with like social media being where it is today, it's short clips do great. Like, you don't, honestly, 30 seconds for an edit, that's a long edit. Like 10 seconds is fine. You can make something really cool and hard hitting in 5 to 15 seconds. Like a lot of stuff that Ari does, you know, it can just be a loop, and it can just be 3 seconds that you just want to watch over and over. So I think, yeah, try to find maybe creators that are doing more simple, easy to like wrap your head around content that might not take as much time but still be as cool.
We have like 2 minutes left.
Sure.
Quick question. Thank you. I had this question from the very beginning of your presentation, and it kind of ties into what Cam. Oh, sorry. What Cam was asking, and it's about. Well, how did you get permission for all those Disney clips, and what do you think about the best places to get stock footage?
I totally did not get permission for anything. But it's okay. It's okay because I wrote it in the caption. I said, "Hey, I don't have permission for this." So like, done, right? Honestly, I do not even know the answer to that. All I know is that I didn't have permission. I wrote it. I very specifically never monetized it because I think most of the issues come when you're monetizing things. But this was also like a long time ago before there was such like intense copyright issues. So I think there are some rules about using like less than 2 seconds of a clip, and it's okay. But there's also great, like there's a free stock asset site called like Pexels, P-E-X-E-L-S. There's also ArtGrid, which I use a lot. And yeah, exactly.
But I'm afraid that they'll show up on everybody else's using the same.
I think Pexels tend.
Because they're more stills than video clips.
Right. There's a bunch of good sites out there. Like ArtGrid is pretty good, but yeah, I mean, you will run into like some people maybe recognizing your clips, but that might not be a bad thing because people will see how you're using it in a different way from other people. So it can also be kind of a good thing.
Hey, Cash.
Hey.
So I'm interested to know, like, unlike him, I don't mind spending hours. But sometimes when you're spending hours in After Effects, for example, and you go down the wrong route and then trying to go back
Oh yeah.
is a pain.
Yes.
I want to know your workflow. How do you manage the creativity with the technical stuff that you have to do in After Effects?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a matter of time has helped me because I used to get into those a lot more often. I guess now I'm kind of a little bit better at streamlining and not getting myself into those situations. But like when I am going to approach an edit that I know what I want to do, I'll like take a step back and like look at it and be like, all right, if I do it this way, that's going to get me here. It's almost like solving a maze, sort of. It's like, okay, that's going to get me into this situation. That's going to get me here. If I make it 3D, then I can't do blending modes and like which order. Like there's a lot of like foresight that goes into it once you know what those catch-ups are going to be. But just, I think just putting a lot of time in to kind of find those things and then learn from them, like just got to make the mistakes, I think, to some point. Because like a lot of the stuff I was doing, there might have been some tutorials on it, but like it was like a weird combination of things that like I couldn't find exact answers to. So sometimes you just have to sort of like try it and see how it goes. But I think the best thing to do in that situation is just iterate. Just like save different versions. Every time you're about to do a big move, save a number and, you know, increment, and then, you know, save it again. So yeah, I think just non-destructive editing.
Last one right here.
Yes.
Hi, Cash. This is a not so fun question, but the life as a freelancer and money. How do you live like that? How do you balance? Obviously, you know, like art is so important, but how do you balance your creativity and trying to make a living, and how do you create a lifestyle that's sustainable so that you have days off and things like that, and have disposable income? And yeah, just I guess kind of general question about how you manage your finances.
Yeah, coming from the world of like, I guess like smaller jobs, and yeah, I at first like was not comfortable charging any high amount of money for anything, because it just felt like there's no way anybody would ever pay me that. And I had to, you know, I got advice from friends that were saying like, you're not charging enough, you have to charge more. And I think it's a good indicator. If you're getting a lot of work and you're saying no to things, you're not charging enough. You should charge more. You should just be at a level where you can handle your amount of work. If not, that means you're high in demand and you really need to up your prices. So as that has happened and as I've like gained traction, I've been able to raise my prices a bit to save myself from burning out and being, you know, juggling 4 projects at a time and just pulling my hair out trying to manage. So I think something that I never realized is just that like asking for more money is a really difficult thing, because you feel like they're gonna think I'm being a jerk, or like they're gonna think this or that, or like how dare she charge that much or whatever. But like people generally know what things cost, and when you start to break it down, like this stuff is expensive. Like your time as a skilled editor is expensive, and other people will pay you for it. So I think it's just having some confidence that like, hey, if I'm getting jobs, that means I'm doing something right and I can up my prices.